All right, here we go. Oh yeah, that's a little bit better.
All right.
Had to comb my beard.
Oh my god. I gotta get when I get my light. I'm gonna probably be on the same type of time. But yeah. All right. Episode four. Episode four. Um, Happy New Year.
Happy New You.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. So this year we are. This is our fourth episode. We are going to do a year in recap, and basically we're going to talk about different topics that happened this year. We're going to try to fly through these and just talk about different things that were highlights of the year or not so much highlights of the year. So this we might be here a while, but we're gonna try to get through it quickly. All right. 2020 was rough. Can you talk about what you were expecting when 2020 happened? When similar to like this year, it's 2021. What are you expecting? Um, I'll say my part. 2020, I thought that it was going to be. I don't know. I had a feeling like it was going to be one hell of a year. We had plans to this year. That last year we were going to travel. We were going to take a family trip. Um, just try to do it up. A little bit more. I don't know why we felt like we had to do a little bit more than we've ever done any other time. But 2020 just seemed like it's time to go big or go home. So we had a lot of plans, and 2020 came, and a lot of that stuff didn't happen. What were your thoughts when the new year came around?
Oh man, I had just made some contacts for some club gigs
Mm,
that looked like they was gonna like get my band back on the scene on a regular, because the folks who were interested in us were interested in us. They weren't looking for a jazz band. They were looking for a band with the kind of energy that we were bringing. Um, so it looked like it was going to be, that was the one thing that looked like it was about to jump.
mm,
Um, my crew was ready, and the original B4 quartet. So and like I said, the folks they wanted a band with our energy, because they wanted to diversify. They had a couple of different groups in there, and they wanted something. They just felt the brother felt like, and him and his wife, they liked my energy. I came in there and sat in with a couple of other bands. They said, "You got a man," and it was like, we want you to bring your thing in. You know,
was this a club?
it was a club restaurant, yeah,
Okay, okay.
and it was in Harlem, and so it meant that we had an audience, kind of music enthusiasts who would be willing to come through, who knew me. So that meant it was going to be easier, to do the PR. The location was good. So that meant that folks in my ensemble, they could invite people, as well. So it wasn't dependent on me, and with a regular crew, with a regular club head, that works as an extension of your business card and your website, because when people, sometimes, you can send somebody to your website, but they want to know how your band sounds. So okay, well, we're going to be here every, Thursday,
Right.
every, other Thursday, whatever it is going to be, and so I knew once we got our foot in the door, we was going to blow up, so
Did y'all get a chance to do any dates at all?
the week that we were scheduled to come in, everything got
Everything shut down. Okay. All right, so it looks like you and I both had plans, this year, and I'm sure there were a slew of other people who had plans. And then January 26th happens, and we hear the news that Kobe Bryant and his daughter and a
mm,
few other members in the helicopter ride died. Um,
everybody.
Everybody died. Yeah, and the helicopter, the pilot,
I think it was
everybody.
what, about 9 people altogether.
13. I want to
13?
say
13?
about
Okay.
13 altogether. Do you remember where you was at?
I don't remember where I was at, but I do remember the fact that I wasn't a real big Kobe fan.
Okay.
I liked this game. I mean, I thought he was good, but
Mhm.
by the time he came along, fan. I like basketball, man. So it's like good game. I don't care who's playing,
Okay.
and that thing about who's the best and all of that.
We know
You
Jordan's
know,
the best.
yeah.
We know that. We know that. Before we go in this tangent, give Kobe his flowers.
Oh,
I was a
back
fan of
at Kobe.
I
Back
was
at
a
this
fan of
is where it
Kobe.
started. Right, right.
Yes.
So let me say this: Kobe, great player. I grew to know more about him, and what I was going to say about Kobe. I was surprised that I was as the reason I mentioned it that I wasn't a big Kobe fan. I was surprised how touched I was when that happened.
Hmm.
And especially when I learned about how many other things that he was involved in, community wise, and I like the fact, this young brother, the multilingual thing in terms of Spanish and Italian and English, and as international, his scope was. And of course, there's some conspiracy people behind that because there were some things that Kobe was trying to get involved with that would have, empowered a lot of African Americans.
Hmm.
He was, and then you get a fuller picture of him, and it's like, oh wow, I didn't know he was into that, and this,
Yeah.
that, and other. So I learned more about him, and as I was learning, I grew to appreciate that young man, and even the way he left the game, at that last game when he shot what, how many, 62,
Yeah, he had 60,
60,
60 points.
60
Yeah.
points, and
He
then he
shot he
he
shot a
drops
lot.
the mic. Yeah, he shot
Yeah.
a lot, he shot a lot, and they won the game.
Which is eerie that he leaves the game like that. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
And he never gets a chance to do his Hall of Fame speech. But now if you go back and watch it, it seems like his Hall of Fame speech. You know what I mean? He's
yeah,
like Mamba out and he's like drops the mic and it's like it's crazy. It's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
I have a few memories. I got a chance to see Kobe play one time.
Mhm.
Um, we saw we drove up to Philly to go see him and AI. It was
Mhm.
AI's year that Philly brought him in, and when Kobe died, I was almost ripping this house apart because I'm like I always keep like my ticket stubs, so I
Mhm.
found that ticket stub, and so we got a chance to see him play the first half. AI went crazy. Second half, Kobe shuts all that down.
Mhm.
Um, Another memory of Kobe is when I came home one night and I'm sitting there watching ESPN. I don't think we had League Pass at that time, and across the ticker they tell you like different things, and so across the ticket comes up uh, third quarter Kobe has like 60 some points. I'm like, what?
Hmm. Yeah, that was the game he scored 80
And
something.
then he's like 81 points. I'm like, oh my god! And then the next day, it's like anytime that game comes on, I'll make sure that I watch it. So
You remember what Mike said about that?
no, what do you say?
He said nobody fouled out.
That's Mike for you. That's Mike for
He
you.
was more upset about that. He said
It's
nobody
like
fouled out.
nobody fouled out. Yeah, it's like, come on, somebody got to foul out
Nobody got to
something,
fall out.
man.
He's got to put a stop to that.
But the one thing I liked about and I go back and watch it, Jalen Rose says the whole time he's not trash talking. He's just
Right,
so much in the zone.
right,
And when I went back to watch it, I thought he was playing, but I'll go back and watch it. He's really not talking. He's not saying anything. He's
right.
just putting up buckets.
Putting up buckets.
And he came to New York. I wasn't at the Rookie that day, but I heard about it, and because it was known for like certain days, NBA players would just come up there, and he came up there. It rained the second half. They tried to go to the Gauchos, but Kobe was like he wanted to play at the Rutgers, so he was done. So it was like little parts. So when the tragedy happened, it kind of really affected me because I was like, this is
Yeah, because
somebody
we
that
live right down the street from Rutgers.
yeah, and it's like this is somebody I kind of feel like we like grew up with because I remember watching the '98 All Star game in New York, him and Mike going at it,
Mm.
and not really paying attention to the fact that they did sit him down. like
Mm.
the third and fourth quarter. Like he doesn't play
Mm.
because they Mike is
Mike was the
they
chosen one.
yeah,
Yeah.
they giving Mike the MVP. So it's like they're not gonna let this kid keep
Jordan,
going back.
Jordan rules.
That's a fact. That's a fact. And that's the crazy thing. T was trying to tell me that right then in
Mm.
'98. He like, yo, they're not playing Kobe. I'm like, nah, it's Mike's time. It's Mike's time. I'm not trying to hear that. But now, older now, I go back and watch the game. I'm like, yeah, they really ice homie out. But it's not uncommon in the league for them to do that.
Yeah.
The Young Bucks, they tell the Young Bucks to sit down. They didn't know how great Kobe was going to be. So I thought that was cool.
Mm.
Moving on, this is something not so much of a highlight, but on February 23rd, me and Terry go to see our last concert. We went to go see Griselda. They are a rap group from Buffalo. And the reason why I bring this up is because for some reason, I guess after the Kobe thing, it was like, that's another reason why I didn't want to take 2020 for granted. So I'm like, any opportunity, now it's like my plans are I'm about to add more stuff to this plan. Like, we're going to do this. We're going to go to this show. I'm not missing nobody's show because it's like, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, ain't promise. So we go see this concert. That ends up being our last concert before March 11th and March 15th. And March 11th is the day that the NBA and the rest of the sports leagues shut down. March 15th is the day that kind of like the global shutdown for coronavirus.
Mm.
And what was your thoughts when March comes around and now we're on a global shutdown?
Um, if I'm not mistaken, February 23rd. Let's go back to that.
Okay.
That was a commemoration of the assassination of Al Haj Malik Shabazz.
Mm.
So that was, one of the last major assemblies that I went to in terms of community gatherings in Harlem.
Mm.
Uh, so, and it was at the Audubon
Wow.
where he
Okay.
was assassinated, in the room where where he was
Wow.
assassinated. And there's a plaque on the floor. The stage is not there, but on the floor, that the spot where he fell.
Mm.
And
Did you perform or you just went to?
well, that one I just went to, but
Okay.
I
Okay.
I, I have I have provided some cultural presentations there along this because it's been I didn't have to be performing in order for me to go there. After
Mm.
all, Malcolm is to this day a very important person in my life, icon. What he represents, in spite of his contradictions, he was see, and I feel compelled to say that because Malcolm was not the kind of person who was unwilling to admit when he was wrong, to learn from his mistakes, to constantly challenge himself to learn. And if he got some new information that proved that something opinion or some position that he held was incorrect, if he got information that said, "Oh, you need to rethink this," he would.
Mm.
And uh, that in and of itself meant that he was never one to try to develop a cult of personality around himself. His thing was more about the principles that he and those he worked with were supposed to be standing for, even if they were his mentors.
Mm.
You know, and it might not be easy to do in the case of his mentors, but eventually, he was like, the principle is more important than the person,
Mm.
and that is something that I'm still learning from. Um, and I work on being the kind of human being that, when it's appropriate, to admit I was wrong,
Mm.
and then to change not only my thinking but my behavior accordingly. It's not easy, man. Because some
No.
some some of the contradictions we carry are just so internal, ingrained.
Mhm.
It really takes a lot to undo certain habits. And but it's worth the effort. I submit that it is definitely worth the effort. You
Mhm.
know, it's not always easy, and part of it is learning that everything good to you ain't necessarily good for you, and learning what that means. And Malcolm was definitely one, who worked at being the kind of person that stuck to the principles that he believed in, but was willing to change his thinking and his behavior if he became informed enough where there was a contradiction or a flaw in a particular position that he had taken over a period of time. And once that flaw was clarified for him, then the thing is what do I do to grow? What do I do to grow? And that's not an easy thing growing up. Sometimes you gotta, keep it moving. You know,
That's a fact.
and it's not always easy. It's not always easy.
No.
Uh, and we make mistakes along the way, and sometimes in an effort to keep it moving, sometimes we keep it moving in a hasty way and make mistakes. you know and then at that point you still got to keep moving, but you got to think about that. Okay, well, next time because it will come around in a cycle, but it's not going to be a circle. So it's
Mhm.
not going to be exactly the same, but stuff will come back around. But then we got to use our mindset, to deal with the changing of the particulars of the circumstances, and still work at keeping our awareness up so that we're prepared.
Mhm.
It's not always easy. It's not always easy. But we got to keep growing, man. And so then the work is, to do the work. To work to grow. Growth is work. It's an effort. It's not
Mhm.
something that comes easy. We have to work. We have to do the work. And sometimes there's certain things we might not necessarily work as hard at had we not made certain mistakes. Sometimes those mistakes, we're compelled to grow up,
Right.
in a way that we may have taken, for granted, other than that. Um, yeah, Malcolm, uh, February 23rd, as a communal gathering, I'm reminded of Malcolm, and that was really important. And again, there was at that point in time, I think they were just beginning to talk about COVID-19.
Mhm.
And then it was like, well, what's going to happen? And then next thing you know, within a couple of weeks, yeah, stuff is shutting down. When it shut down, as an educator, teaching artist, it affected me because I'm not teaching in person.
Yeah.
I've been online since then. Fortunate that I still had the opportunity to teach.
Right.
I've these last few years, I've really grown uh, to love teaching. You know, and I'm being reminded as I get older that teaching keeps me young because I got to keep studying. I got to learn new stuff so that I can introduce these students, to new things. And just in dealing with this infrastructure in terms of the internet and all of that kind of stuff, how to utilize this, to teach students that most of the time I can't even see them. They can see me, but I can't see them because I'm dealing with middle school kids, and that's the way the rules are, and because they're at home, they're not in class, they're at home, and so the privacy of their homes is sacrosanct, so I get that, but it's hard to teach a student, especially at a young age, how to play an instrument when you can't even see what they're playing, and uh the instruments, trying to find a way to be creative and say, well, what tools do you have in your home that you can use for percussion instruments?
Right.
That's been a thing. You know, so it's compelled me to rethink a lot of stuff. You know,
Mm.
and I'm aware that it's these this year, and we figure at least 2021, maybe in 2022 we'll be in a situation where they'll be back. But those 2 years is going to set back a lot of students,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because they're just the thing that human beings are communal learners. You know, children don't just learn from the teachers; they learn from each other. You know, and so there are certain things that the teacher will explain to one child, and when that child gets it, they pass along their understanding to their comrades. You know, and so those other children in the interaction process between themselves, just in their socializing, you know, they're talking about certain things, and you know,
Nah, do it like this. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Stuff like that.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. You know, so you got friends looking out for friends, you got cousins and other relatives looking out for each other, you know. And so if they got an older sibling, you know, they got that older sibling can help them, you know, and somebody who's closer to their age talks in that generational language dialect, I should say, that generational dialect in a way that, you know, the teacher may not always be knowledgeable of, let alone, you know, be fluent in. So especially now, because the generation gaps happen rapidly, which is something that wasn't as pronounced when I was coming up.
Mm.
So for instance, musically, you know, it was like you didn't have as much music where that was channeled to youngsters, and everybody was listening to everything, you know.
Yeah.
uh uh you know, the elders in the house that I grew up in, you know, they were listening to the Temptations. You know, if they were in the jazz, we all listened to jazz. You know, my mom introduced me to Cannonball Adderley and Nancy Wilson. You know, that album that Nancy was, it was Cannonball's. He was the leader of it. His band played on everything, but on the second side, Nancy was the featured vocalist, and she sang on all the tunes. So uh, but I heard that because my mom had it in the house. It was music. I liked the music. You know, I did not buy the album that influenced me as a vocalist, Going to a Go-Go. I didn't buy that album. My mama bought that album. So she bought
Mm.
that, and then she bought, you know, a Nancy Wilson album that had Cannonball Adderley on it, one of the great, you know, quote unquote jazz saxophonists, you know. And the reason I say quote unquote, because some people don't like the word jazz, you know, but it's a genre that actually, from what I understand over the years, that the word probably comes from a Wolof word, jazz, J-Z, that means to improvise. So
Mm.
a lot of people think that it has just the Bordeaux connotations, you know, whereas in these prostitution houses, bands would be playing there, and they're saying they were spelling it JASM, jasm, as, you know, to ejaculate, you know, and that's what it meant. But that's, you know, now there's enough information. We say no, it just means to improvise, and
Mm.
and so, but as we become more informed, hopefully, you know, people will become more aware and less, you know, offended when somebody used the word jazz. Now, I don't, as a musician, I don't call myself a jazz player, even though I've studied it. You know, I'm more of a folklorist, you know, in that regard. But there's some of those tunes are in my repertoire. But getting back to what I was saying, in terms of teaching, March was a very uh, traumatic time. You know, for first of all, when the schools were shut down, not knowing if I would have a gig, you know, and being taking a sigh of relief when I found out, okay, I'm gonna have a gig, but now I gotta adjust. Now I gotta figure out how I'm gonna do this, and they're still trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
They're still trying to figure it out. When this homeschooling thing, you know, uh,
The schools weren't
and,
prepared for this
no,
at all.
and they still aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And the technology is, you
As
know,
much technology as we have, you're right. You know.
yeah. Is they're not so these different platforms, even the one that we're using now, you know, they're still learning, and there's some things that adults can get out of this, but in terms of teaching children,
Yeah, I'm fighting with that too because it's like as much as like we're working and we're trying to pay attention to him while he's on the computer and everything. It's tough. It's
yeah,
tough, and then it's like sometimes if your child likes being in the classroom, they would rather that interaction than just sitting there looking at a screen. You
yes,
know, so
because that interaction with the children and the competition. I
yeah.
remember when I even and it wasn't something that I intentionally did. It was just that I remember my best friend, this young brother named James, and both of us had crushes on the two girls that sat in front of us. He liked Drew, I liked Laura, you know. And I remember we used to make up stories about how the four of us was going to go to these different planets, and rocket ships we was going to fly in and stuff like that.
Oh
And
wow.
and at the same time, when it came to doing our work, the four of us were the smartest kids in the class,
Oh wow.
you know. And there was so it was a competitive thing, it was like, and but it was friendly competition because he was my
Yeah.
best friend, and so it wasn't like, oh, I can't hang with you because we're fighting to see who's going to be the
Hmm.
smartest kid. No, it was a friendly competition, competition that made us want to be better, you
Right.
know and these kind of things, that camaraderie, the game, playing games, children learn through playing.
That's a fact.
In fact, in New York State, in the state curriculum, it specifically says the only there are 2 hours that are supposed to be accounted for every day, Monday through Friday. It says that each child is supposed to get 1 hour of organized play.
Mm.
1 hour of organized play and 1 hour of creative arts. So that means it could be painting, it could
Hmm.
be dance, it could be instrumental,
Hmm.
right? You know, like I said, dance, music, visual arts, because children learn through play and the creative arts inspire their imagination. It's not about every child becoming a professional musician. It's not about every child becoming a professional dancer. It's not about every child becoming a professional artist. But out of art comes architecture.
Mm. Right. That's a fact.
When you spark a child's imagination, then that imagination starts something, and then the next thing you know, that imagination is going from music to science, where they're going to develop the technique that they need in order to get to the moon. Which, by the way, I must say, I'm one of those people who don't believe that human beings have ever been to the moon as of yet.
All right. So look. So March 15th, they announced no gatherings of 50 or more, and then California starts high number of cases of COVID in April. One of the things that also happened in April, from an internet standpoint, is that now we're all stuck in the house, and so between these social media platforms and platforms like this, uh, people, celebrities are trying to find different ways to just entertain people. So you have people like DJ D Nice, who's is like standing there DJing for hours. Like he might go like 10 hours straight, just trying to throw a party for people, just to keep people's spirits up. Swiss Beats and Timbaland, they start a versus battle where you might have two songwriters play a song, something that they wrote, it has since ventured off from the songwriters and producers, and now they do artists. But it was just a way for us to all come together on social media platforms and cheer for our favorite artists or find out who actually wrote that song. So that was something that was good. And then on March 13th, Breonna Taylor is shot and killed in Louisville, Kentucky. Um,
So
it was a tough
it,
one, but
in
go ahead.
terms of, I'm gonna deal with them in the order that. Well, no, I'm actually flip the order.
Okay.
Let's deal with Breonna Taylor first. The public lynching of African people is a part of America's very being. Public lynchings of Africans in this country have been used from the time 1619 in terms of the first shipload of enslaved Africans, because they didn't bring any slaves from Africa.
Hmm.
These Africans were prisoners of war. And from the very time, and actually preceding 1619, in the 1500s, when they were bringing Africans to the Caribbean and to South America, terrorism, the level of terrorism to impose will by these demonic mindsets whereby they were looking at other human beings as property, a concept that had preceded the invasion of Africa by thousands of years of practicing that behavior amongst themselves, these people who now call themselves Europeans. That was part of their culture. That's what they were doing to each other. In fact, that's where the word slave comes from. You know, the Slavic, the Eastern European folk, the Slavic speaking peoples, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, and other places, the Croatians, Polish, those Slavic speaking peoples, you know, whereby the landowners owned everything and everybody on their property. So much so that the landowner had the right to rape the wife of any married couple, the woman, in any couple that was getting married on its property, he had the right of first refusal. He could rape that woman before she got to sleep with her husband. This is imposition of will and dominance. This is what they were doing to each other. So what they turned around and started doing to us, it was just merely of changing tactics after they found out over here that the people who they now call indentured servants. But you got to think about this. Overwhelmingly, the first boatload of Africans that were brought, you know, to what is now known as the United States, they were not enslaved for life. They too were indentured servants. But over a period of time, Africans, enslaved Europeans, who are truly the only slaves that they brought, the only slaves they brought to this country from other places were from Europe, because they were truly Slavic people. Some of them were Slavic peoples who came and changed. And they were otherwise regional variations, because many of those people that we now associate in England, Gaul, which is what it was called before it was called France, and the Iberian Peninsula, which has Portugal and Spain. All right. So those areas had where they practiced the type of feudalism that I'm talking about, whereby these landlords could rape these women on their property. All right. That was a part of their thing. So now, if you want to understand, just to bring it update real quick, if you want to understand why some of these European women descendant, you know, here in this country, when it was brought to their attention, wait a minute, how can you vote for this guy, you know, who claims that it's okay for him to go and grab women by their private parts, and they still vote for him? The majority of European women, you know, in this country voted for Agent Orange. In spite of that, and this happened before he ran the first time. All right, they got that on tape as he was, and him, it's not like hearsay. They got it on tape with him
Yeah,
talking about this.
that's a fact.
Okay, so but what was the overall response? Well, boys will be boys, huh?
Yeah.
But that's a part of their culture, historically speaking. That's what they did, and there's a class consciousness where like these people are property. Now, this is not to say that Africans didn't have prisoners of war, but not on a degree that there's some things that are actually there's certain particular things that happen. It didn't happen all around the world, and this is one of them. So anyway, uh, uh, I say that to say the terrorism of African people was done in order to impose a foreign will over these folks who rebelled against enslavement on the continent of Africa when their villages or cities, because we're very urban people. You find more cities, large cities, prior to the 1500s in Africa than any other place on the planet.
Mhm.
All right. I'm talking about large urban areas, well planned out. So this, and with streets, and you had where folks were commuting because there were certain parts in the city where you had farms in the city, and people would commute from where they live to go to their farm, do their work, go back home at night. Commuting was something that folks did. All right. So when these cities or villages were attacked and people massively kidnapped, folks fought back. They didn't just go. They wasn't like, black people was looking for a place to go, to look for a better place, at that point in time, that the invasions started taking place. And as John Henry Clark says, the invasion of Africa as such began in 1800 BC.
Mm.
So by the time the Europeans got involved in this last escapade, starting in after the 1492, by then Africa was worn out, resisting these foreign invasions. That led to exacerbating internal contradictions to another level. It's similar to what happened here when the Europeans came here to this country. Folks moved away from them, and as they moved away, they began to have antagonistic confrontations with other ethnic groups because the so-called Indians are not a monolith. There are a variety of ethnic groups within those people. And when previously they had room, now they don't have room. So they're fighting each other over these territorial things that previously they had enough room not to be dogging each other. Now, so we'll never know how many people died behind those skirmishes because nobody was keeping count.
Mm.
And you have to also understand that chemical warfare begins because Europeans are giving blankets to these Indians that are infected with smallpox. And the diseases, the flu, which about COVID is a variety of flu. The flu wiped out millions of indigenous people because they didn't have the immune resistance. They hadn't been exposed to that. So that flu, when it came through, it wiped out a whole bunch of people. So, but I'm saying that in the struggle, Africans fought on the continent of Africa. We fought on the ships as they brought us over here. Untold numbers of Africans. Ships were sank because battles and fight. Everybody's fighting to the death. Ship sinks, everybody dies. So much so that the insurance companies become man, they're making money like fat rats and cheese factory because the insurance company becomes big because they're providing insurance for these ships because it's dangerous. You might lose. You might kidnap 200 people, but only 20 of them make it across. So they were taking out insurance plans to get compensated. So these insurance people, like I said, people are paying even when they make it over. So this is happening, but in each step along the way, the demonic behavior of these people to impose their will on us is not to be underestimated. In terms of the amount of rape, that was going on in terms of the women and young men,
Mm.
the amount of that was going on, and in a lot of cases was taking place in front of other people who were powerless to stop it. Psychological. So this is going on. We fought against it. We fought against it, like I said, on the continent of Africa. We fought against it on the ships coming over. We fought it over since in certain cases, folks jumped off the boat when they hit the land. They booked into the woods. They didn't know where they was going, but they're getting out of here. And then once they halfway got settled and got to look around, oh, I'm gonna go into the woods, because we got to remember, America, as we see it now, is you get these wide open space. Nah, you're talking about a lot of trees,
right?
A lot of forest land, because folks weren't chopping down trees, and their farming techniques were different, and so they developed farming techniques that dealt with the land as it was, and they weren't cutting down a whole lot of forest areas to farm. That's not how they farm. The natural open areas, they would plant there and take advantage of what was there and then keep it moving, because that meant that they could farm a particular area but not dog it to the point where you couldn't grow anything anymore. They just move a little bit further along the way, a little bit further away, so that they could continue to grow what they needed, and keep the land fertile. So, but Africans were fighting, man. And so I remember there was a book Martin Delaney talked about, and previous to this particular situation in the 1800s, before the war between the states, he was very prominent in the abolitionist movement, which we must remember. The abolitionist movement was started by African people. We were fighting against the enslavement of African people first.
Mm-hmm.
Some Europeans become involved in it, and a lot of them get the credit, but we were the first abolitionists because we were fighting for our freedom. Martin Delaney was a comrade of Frederick Douglass, and they collaborated on freedom presses and a variety of other conferences. There were a variety of conferences that took place here in this country where Africans, got together and discussed how we were going to acquire our freedom. So along the line, Martin had been very hard in terms of his critique of those Africans who were still in chains, until he went on a journey into the South. He was literate. In fact, he was multi-talented in terms of his medical capabilities and whatnot. But he wrote himself a series of passes, because when you're literate, you can write it, and Mamas will say, I can go do this, I can do that. So he went all the way down into the South and moved around. And when he got back, and he's very lucky, because what he said, previous to my journey down there, I was critiquing these folks, for not fighting hard enough. He said, but when he saw the level of violence that was imposed upon African people, he said, it's a wonder that anybody's fighting at all.
Mm.
We fought, though. We fought. So the lynching of Breonna Taylor is a part of the legacy of this apartheid state to impose its will on African people and to limit our development, whether it be socially, politically, intellectually, whatever way, to stifle our development and to maintain the disproportionate access by Europeans, and a small class amongst those Europeans in particular, to the human and material resources of the planet. So that level of terrorism, that's what that is. So when they came into her home, the total disregard from the very inception of the process, because they finally have fired the guy who applied for the warrant,
Mm.
because they know that the warrant was bogus.
Right.
Had he done his due diligence, it should have never been granted. And actually, they should fire the judge who probably just rubber stamped the application for the warrant,
Mhm.
never looked at it, and never held them accountable. So the judge should be charged as complete, because he's complicit in this, because that's what they do. They say, okay, you want a warrant? Okay, bet. Look at
I
that.
can't tell you how many. I'm sure, of course, we know what happens in real life, but I can't tell you how many times now, you see these documentaries and you find out that, hey, just if it's their homeboy, it's like, yo, just sign it real quick. Did you? And sometimes they always show that clip of the guy saying, did you check? He's like, yeah, I checked it. We know half the time that wasn't even going on. They just like, hey, sign it. Like, I got it. Whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And so in this particular case, had they done their due diligence, which they should have done, if they had been really paying attention, and in fact they may have, because of her previous relationship with this guy, they may have assumed, because as far as they're concerned, all black people are involved in this. Maybe the reason they broke up was because he was involved in dealing with some drugs and she didn't want to be bothered with him.
Right.
So then, had they paid attention, they may have seen there was no traffic after they split up. There was no traffic going to her house because she wasn't dealing with that. She's studying to be, in the medical field. She's trying to get up to the next level, So, had they paid attention, but what they don't talk about in the media is the degree to which in Louisville, Kentucky, just like a lot of other cities in this country, including New York City, Baltimore, DC, Compton, Los Angeles, Oakland, Chicago, these police, when they get these warrants, they're not just looking for drug dealers. They're looking for contraband. So they may go in there, just because, and even if they say, oh, it's a suspect, drug dealer, that don't mean that they're going to report all that they get.
No.
And remember in Training Day movie, they talked about that, right? Cop goes in there, rips off the drug dealer because he's trying to pay off a debt. All right, so he goes in that drug dealer because who's the drug dealer going to be? He stole my drugs?
Right.
So when they go into Brianna's house, they're thinking, oh, she's the ex. She got some money. We can just do this.
And something has to be done with, and like you said, maybe they didn't care at all either. But something has to be done as far as the law changes when you actually have arrested the person. He's already in custody, earlier that day, and they're still fulfilling
the warrant.
Yeah, the warrant. It's crazy.
He was already busted. He was busted at a place where he actually lived, and there was another. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, it was either another precinct or another agency. It may have been the FBI that busted the guy. And then the local yokels, they just, they drug, it was within the police department, narcos, the narcs. Yeah. So the narcs, they're the ones, this crew, they're the ones who are like, these are the cowboys, so they're the ones that are like doing all of this stuff. And yet there's some of the most crooked cops on there. They're on the tape. And so sometimes they'll be busting somebody, or have a bogus, stop. And once they find out this guy is into something, then that becomes a regular payoff. I'll let you do what you're doing, but you got to hit me up. Okay, cool. And then every now and then when they need for statistics to bust somebody, Hey, you got to go down, or you got to point somebody out to me.
Right.
You know, so that starts up, and then that instigates a whole level of distrust in the community. All kind of stuff. Who's pointing the finger at who? All that kind of stuff.
Who's a snitch and who's a
Yeah.
rat?
Right. And so these things, so in the case with Breonna, we have to understand that the legacy of this apartheid state, what had happened after the Bacon Rebellion and other rebellions, they began to limit the enslavement of human beings to African people in particular. Why? Because we were the most obvious. All black people become, quote unquote, enslaved or due to be not respected. Those free Africans had to walk around with papers proving that they were free. And they could be stopped at any time. And if they didn't have them papers, next thing you know, they own somebody's plantation, or I should say, in somebody's death camp.
Mm-hmm.
Because the word plantation is really misleading, and we need to be careful about using certain words in certain circumstances. Plantation, you get this outlook like these are death camps, and literally, when they find in different situations, when they find bones of Africans who were prisoners on these death camps, and you see the bodies, the way the bodies, the damage done, these folks were worked to death, and beaten and lynched and all kind of stuff was going on, and then when they went to when they were looking for Turner and Goodman, Turner, and I forget his name. The three workers who were working down in Mississippi, when they were looking for those bodies, and then they went to the river and they found a whole bunch of bodies. Got to the point they said, "Look, we got to get some more information. We got to find out exactly where these kids are, because we can't be finding no more bodies, because they was finding all of these bodies of black folk that have been lynched and murdered and thrown into the river." So this situation, whether you're talking about that or whether you're talking about this recent incident about Blake, who was shot in the back 7 times in front of his 3 sons and lucky to be alive, but he's paralyzed. These public lynchings are done to intimidate African people, because the message is being sent to everybody that they got the power to do that to us. But the story that's not told is the level of resistance amongst African people from the very beginning. We're not going to stop resisting.
Right.
That's not going to happen.
Never.
And the reality of it is that they saw, after the war between the states, and notice I don't call it a civil war, because there's nothing civil about war. That's an oxymoron, contradiction in terms. When you're stabbing and shooting and clubbing and ripping arms and eyes out and gashing all of that, and burning and rape, all of that kind of stuff is going on at the same time. That's not civil. All civility has ended. So the war between the states, within one generation, we got Africans graduating from Harvard University, W.B. Du Bois, Carter G. Woodson, and a host of others. Carter G. Woodson, his parents were enslaved on them death camps. He worked in the coal mines till he was 20 years old, and then he went to school. And then worked his way through high school and college, and eventually gets his PhD from Harvard University in history. He's the second African to do so. W.B. Du Bois was the first. So in one generation, the first generation, he wasn't born enslaved, but his parents were. Carter G. Woodson was the first African and the last African to graduate from Harvard whose parents had been enslaved on those death camps. But there was a bunch of other Africans who were coming through these colleges within one generation. And then you're seeing these free towns all over the South and the North, where black people want their own communities. And you think that Tulsa, Oklahoma was the only one that was burned down? No. Everywhere you went, when black people get their foot up, when they talk about pull yourself up by your bootstrap, and every time you turn around, somebody's stealing the laces, cutting the soles out from under you, and breaking your legs because they did the thought that these people who had been just moments ago enchained on these death camps, struggling for air to breathe, were capable of doing such a thing after all the lies they had told about how lazy we were. Well, if we were so lazy, how come you kept going back to Africa for us and bringing more of us over here? So we need to understand the historical context that particular situation Breonna Taylor represents. This has been from its very inception an apartheid state. And in fact, what they don't talk about is that this country fought against Britain for the same reason that the Confederacy fought against the North. The Confederacy fought against the North because they thought that Abraham Lincoln was going to come in and abolish the enslavement of African people. And they specifically said that in their constitution of the Confederacy and in the state constitutions of those states that seceded away from the Union. And all of them, they said the main thing was that this way of life, the ability for these folks to enslave Africans, was paramount about why they were going to succeed. They were not going to allow these people to stop them from treating Africans the way that they were doing. You got to remember, every president from Washington to the one that right before Lincoln, all of them were involved in the enslavement of African people. They were directly involved as owners, merchants, lawyers they provided legal advice. They were involved in it in one way or another in the profiteering of the enslavement of African people. All of them. So when they talk about bringing down these statues, and somebody says, "Oh, well, next you'll be talking about Abraham Lincoln and blah blah blah." Yeah, yeah.
Him too.
Tear them shit down. Because they always talk that lie about Washington cutting down a cherry tree, but they don't tell you about the black women that he raped and had children by. They don't tell you about that. And every now and then they'll mention Thomas Jefferson and how he raped Sally Hemings, who actually was the sister of his white wife. His white wife gave Thomas Jefferson her sister as a wedding present. Because the father of Thomas Jefferson's wife had raped Sally Hemings' mother. And so Sally is not just his daughter, but his property. And he gives Sally Hemings to Thomas Jefferson as a present.
Let's go ahead. Because we're gonna touch back on this subject as well.
So then the next part of that, we Breonna Taylor. Then we said what else? The march.
Oh, I was talking about the ways people were trying to entertain people while they were home.
Yeah. So for me, that opened up some doors in terms of like online storytelling, poetry presentations, music presentations. So I've been doing some things like that on that, and it's on one level I appreciate it, the opportunity, and I'm widening my audience because some of the people who are seeing us are not only not in the room with me, but sometimes not in the city with me.
Right, right.
So that's a different thing, but it's taking some getting used to because the interaction with the audience,
Hmm.
you know.
There was a comedian that, because they've been paying comedians to do Zoom performances as well, and they can't hear the audience, and they
Right.
feed off of laughs.
Yeah. The
So
timing, the timing. When people, it's like that interaction when folks is laughing, that gives them a chance to, to think in terms of like what comes next and all of that, and to tell
right,
if the joke is working because sometimes there may be two or three punchlines in a joke.
right,
So you're working up to a certain point, but along the line there are little markers that let that they're getting it. You know.
and so he's performing, and he doesn't see anybody laughing or anything, and I guess he has it in a view where he can see majority of the audience, and one of the audience members is asleep, like just at the desk, like just knocked out. He was like, "I guess I ain't funny." He leaves. He just leaves the meeting. He's like, I'm done with this." So it's like some comedians are like, if I can't get in front of the people, I'm not gonna do this.
And we also have a situation where some of these comedians are putting their lives in jeopardy
Mm-hmm.
because when it came opportunity to perform live, they jumped at it.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the name? D.L. Hughley.
Theo Hoogly, yep.
So that's a precarious situation. I know for me, uh, I went back to something that I hadn't done for years, and this would happen later on. But I digress. Later on in the year, I'll tell you about that.
Okay.
Let's go to the next year
All
date.
right. So then we have March 27th, and that's when the stimulus bill is passed, and they give everybody stimulus checks.
Pennies on the dollar.
Pennies on the
Look,
dollar.
it was like, okay, you're gonna give up $1,200. Okay, that's a month's rent.
Man, that's
In the
like
urban areas, you might get 2 months rent, or depending on where you live in the country.
mhm.
You know, you'd be lucky if but if it's mortgage, it's like, look, in certain of these countries, well, let's just go back. Let's just deal with this country real quick when you're talking about that stimulus deal. And you got all them politicians who gave away billions of dollars in terms of subsidies to some of these major corporations.
Mhm.
And then they get around talking about, oh man, the American people don't want a handout. First of all, it ain't a handout.
Right.
You're dealing with our tax monies.
How about to
This
say
is
we
money
pay we
that
paying
we're
taxes?
working for.
Mhm.
So that tax money is supposed to be allotted or organized so that public works can be developed, like roads,
Mhm.
schools, hospitals, public transportation,
Mhm.
energy infrastructures. All of these different things can be subsidized by our taxes because everybody's benefiting from it. Not to mention that the people who work, they get compensated. So now these entities, you're paying for those services, you're paying for light, you're paying for the cars, automate in terms of their industries that are a part of the road infrastructures and all of that. That's what makes it easier for the cars. Even though my position is basically, if public transportation was as efficient as it ought to be all around the country, there would be a lot less need for cars.
Yeah,
Now,
that's a fact.
and if they were maintained the way that they should have been, like for instance, when COVID hit, all of a sudden they're talking about they're going to make time to clean all the subways. Well, why weren't you doing that before?
Yeah.
You mean you weren't doing it?
No.
No. Oh, now we know they weren't, and now they're gonna we're gonna close down at 1 a.m. and we're gonna close down till 5 a.m. in the morning. We're gonna take that time to clean it. Or you should have been doing that, you
Right.
know. Or you should have hired enough people that if you're gonna run 24/7, you're hiring enough people not only to keep the places clean, the trains clean and the stations clean and all of that, but in order to service these things so that they're not breaking down every 5 minutes, and to service the tracks because that's regular maintenance. But they trying to run everything on a hum and a prayer, and because they don't want to pay people decently,
But they
and
keep
everybody,
raising that price of that Metro card.
yeah, they're quick to do that. Now, mind you, and then like when they talk about we don't want socialism, well, one of the things they don't talk about is the politicians, like for instance, the senators, the state senators, and the state and the federal congressmen. A congressman serves 2 years. Senators serve 6 years terms. Do you know that each congressman and each senator they do one term, either a 2 year term or a 6 year term. In either case, after that one term, they got their medical care taken care of for the rest of their life.
Hmm.
They'll never have to pay a hospital bill. That's socialism. But if it's good enough for the congressmen and the senators, how come it ain't good enough for us? It's just about organizing it. Oh no, it can't work for this because of that. It works. There's plenty of instances where it works, and obviously it's working for the senators and the congressmen. They don't have to worry. That's the burden they don't have to take. Worry about. And in a lot of these countries, you can go to like for instance in Cuba, you can go to college all you want, and never get in debt for going to school. Cuba has one of the highest literacy rates on the planet. They export more doctors than the rest of the UN together. You got Cuban doctors in Africa, you got Cuban doctors throughout the Caribbean, you got Cuban doctors in South America. Anywhere that people ain't intimidated by the United States, they got Cuban doctors. And all they say is, okay, y'all put them up, we'll pay their salary. Cuba pays the salary of these doctors. They're not just sending people and they're living off the fat. No, Cuba is still paying their salaries. All they say is you provide their room and board. Give them a decent place to live. We'll take care of their salary. And yet, this country is this economic boycott of Cuba that they're trying to run to destabilize the economy of that country. But fortunately, there are enough countries who say, "Hey, we're going to deal with Cuba." But because it's a farther distance, America's a natural trading partner for Cuba. There were many things that Cuba would be able to sell, a lot easier than anywhere else, or throughout the islands. But this economic embargo, is imposed in a way to what they're really afraid of is that the thought of having free education, the thought of having free healthcare, these kind of things, that's a disease they don't want spread.
Right.
But I know some people who went to Cuba for some surgeries that they couldn't afford here.
Gotta do what you gotta do.
So
go ahead.
Yeah.
So in wake of what we just witnessed, I don't want to keep jumping back and forth, but in wake of what we just witnessed yesterday, on April 30th, armed protesters entered the state capitol in Lansing, Michigan. I forgot all about that. So this whole bum rush in the capitol
ain't new. And eventually
these are terrorists.
These are domestic terrorists. And these guys threatened to kidnap the governor of Michigan, and they were planning on taking her to Wisconsin and trying her, and eventually stringing her up.
Wow.
Yeah, they look. These domestic terrorists. What you got to remember Timothy McVeigh?
Yeah.
How many people died in that Oklahoma bomb?
Oh yeah.
But you know, a lot of them were kids.
Yeah. And it was wasn't it a hospital, something like
It
that?
was a daycare center, something like
Yeah.
that.
Daycare center was in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to continue to go down that path, on May 7th, Greg and Travis McMichael are charged with murder for shooting Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia.
And again, you know, you have a situation where these quote unquote average everyday white folk take it upon themselves, you know, and hunt down this brother because they can. It's really that simple. And to send a message, you know, to other black folk in the area that they can do this.
And I wrote down later on May 21st, the guy who filmed it, because I was wondering, like, when this
Yeah,
video
he
came out,
eventually
he
got
got charged too.
charged too.
But he
Yeah.
was charged on the 21st. But I'm like, this video, what is this guy doing? You know, because half the time it's like,
Yeah. He was involved in it.
he was involved.
He helped corral this brother,
Mm-hmm.
you know, because the brother was trying to get away from them. So he's running between these yards and things, trying to figure
Right.
out a way out, you know. And this guy who's filming it, you know, he's letting figure, oh, he's over here, he's over there, you know. And they eventually, you know, and eventually, when the media got a hold of this other information, he releases it thinking that that's going to help him get off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, well, I got some footage of this, you know. And so, well, how'd you get the footage?
Right.
What? You
It's
know,
like
then
nobody would think to bring out their phone.
yeah. So one thing leads to another, and then you know he getting charged. You know, and I'll say this because I don't know what's going to be that final outcome. I suspect it might not. Whatever happens, it ain't going to be to the degree to make up for all the lives lost in the history of this Western apartheid
No way.
genocidal plan. You know that has infected and affected the land itself, the human and other beings in the Western Hemisphere. In terms of they almost wiped out all of the buffalo, you know, and untold. We don't know how many other animal species have been depopulated behind this wanton destruction, you know, of these other beings, you know, and the wanton pollution of the water. And wait a minute, everybody knows that you know these metal pipes. Why would you put them underwater?
Yeah.
Drinking water. Eventually, the pipe is going to bust
Mm-hmm.
or rust, which means it's going to leak. There's no such thing as a pipe that ain't going to leak somewhere along the line, and you're gonna put it underwater through drinking water. It don't make sense. The amount of ethnic groups, they're ethnic groups that we may have never even heard of because they were wiped out. You know, folks who in so-called Indians, they were small and large communities. And some of the smaller ones, you know, that were able to exist previously, you know, because of the circumstances, again, you know, people being pushed and folks being bum rushed out of their particular their terrain and eventually get swallowed up or wiped out. You know, this, you know, the amount of the price paid for these people to do what they've done. Nah.
Crazy. May 8th, the unemployment rate goes up to 14%. On May 22nd, Lori Loughlin pleads guilty to the college scandal. She was paying to get her kids in college and
And you
lying
know,
and lying and saying that she was on a road team and she never rode before.
and didn't roll when she got in college. So all of this that just reminds me again that college art education ought be, the access to information ought be free.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and
But let me ask you a question. I think it should be free for people who, of course, who can't afford it. But she's an actress. Why were they paying to get her into these schools? Why didn't they just pay the tuition? I know at some point your grades gotta match, I guess, to get into certain schools.
no, they
But
don't.
if I'm about to say, because if you just paying the tuition, she should just go.
Yeah, and there were plenty of schools that she could have gone to, but it was prestige.
Yeah.
Certain schools have prestige and their connections. They when they send their kids to a particular school with that money thing, they're looking for an advantage because the networking that takes place, the people that she will meet, the students that she will, interact with, these are the children of people who are the financiers, who are the producers, who are the directors, the CEOs, and all of that kind of stuff. And so they want to make sure that their children are in a position to network so that their grandchildren will be in a better position to maintain the disparity of access to money.
Mm.
That's what that is, as opposed to if you have an educational system that says you're able to go as far as you want as long as you're able to earn the grades to go further. That sets up another thing. That means you can't depend on what your mom and your daddy did. You got to be able to do the work. You can go to school for free, but you got to be able to do the work.
Right.
We're not just going to get passed along. You can't pay your way through this. You got to earn your way through this. You pay by the work that you do, the grades that you get based on your ability to deal with that material in a fashion that clearly shows that you can utilize this information once you graduate. And see, this brings up another issue. Everybody ain't going to college,
Right.
but a plumber makes damn near as much as a doctor.
Mm. And they don't. And they
But
don't have. Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, and they go through plumbing more often than not. First of all, the hardest thing was to get into the unions, and there's certain credentials that you have to acquire. But the thing of it is, it's not the same as the debt, the level of debt that you get in from going through these academic schools. And I'm sure that if people, a lot of people who work in the post office are very intelligent people. They just didn't want to deal with the bullshit. Look, why should I go and get 20 years of debt when I can work in the post office, provide a service that everybody needs? Everybody needs access to their mail. So this is they're just as important as doctors. It's a different type of importance, but
Right.
it's like doctors ain't no more important. In fact, the postal service, in terms of keeping people in touch with one another, and the amount of information that goes through the postal service, look, they're damn near as important as the internet with
Right.
less manipulation
Right.
of the material.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're told that this infrastructure is so accessible for everybody, but no, it ain't. You're paying for how fast your internet speed is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that means that everybody ain't paying for the same speed. So that means that everybody's not going to be able to work as fast or because depending on what kind of computer they got, depending on what kind of Wi-Fi service they got, all of these kind of things, all tied to economics. And they're always trying to sell you, well, if you spend a few dollars, more per month, your information will travel faster. You can download this stuff faster. Everything's got to be fast.
Right.
As opposed to, okay, well, there's a fast way to do it. Okay, everybody should have access to it.
Right.
But greed. What Bob Marley used to say: "There's more than enough for everybody need, but not enough for everybody greed."
Right.
And make no mistake about it, profit is more addictive than heroin.
Mm. Now, just on the side tangent, do you agree? This wasn't on the list, but being that we're talking about schools, and do you think that we don't have enough vocational schools?
Not nearly enough.
Because
And I remember in Chicago, you had a lot of different vocational schools. So that meant that
and that was something that kind of intrigued me when that coach reached out to me, and wanted me to go to that school. And then when I found out what kind of school it was, I was like, because in New York, I never heard of that. That they was,
well, they
that
got
type
them,
of
but they
school.
don't have them
It's
like they
not
used
that,
to.
yeah,
In fact, I think you got aeronautics in Queens. You got one. I know you got one in Brooklyn. I know you got one in Staten Island. I don't know if they have one in Manhattan or Brooklyn. Well, no, Brooklyn. Yes, they do have one. I don't know if they have one in the Bronx or Manhattan. Those I'm not sure, but I know in Queens they have an aeronautics vocational school,
mm,
and then I know they have one in Staten Island. I know they have at least one in Brooklyn. You know, but yeah, like Simeon. I think that's the school that you might have been offered.
CVS.
CVS. Oh yes, I had. In fact, I had a friend of mine that went to Donnie went to CVS. I had a bunch of friends. So, people could come out and be an auto mechanic. Auto
Mm-hmm.
mechanics get paid.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Car breaks down, need some work.
You're gonna need somebody to fix it.
You're gonna need somebody to fix. And people be like, got their nose all up in the air because what, he got grease on his clothes, but he can come home and take a bath
Right.
and buy some nice clothes to wear on the weekend.
That's a fact. That's a
You
fact.
know, and then unfortunately get a whole lot of debt sending his kids to college
Yeah.
when they might not even want to go to college. I'm not saying anything's wrong with college. I'm just saying
No,
it ain't
no.
for
It's not
everybody.
gonna be for everybody. So that's what I'm
You know?
saying. These
So
are
the thing is to
for
prepare people to be productive citizens
right.
so that there are a range of choices. And there's some things, like for instance, in baseball, you got the minor leagues. Folks, in the minor leagues, you got some people making $100,000 a year
Mm-hmm.
because some of those cats were drafted in the first round. They coming right out of high school, going into these minor leagues, and they get drafted. Depending on how they get drafted, they making some ducats, or even let's say they making let's say at this rate $40,000 a year playing baseball.
Playing baseball.
You do that for a couple of years, you got a chance to travel, to do
Mm-hmm.
something that you like doing. You may not become a star in the professional leagues, and make it to the majors, but you got at least 2 or 3 years where you were able to earn a living doing what you love, playing a
Right.
game
Mm-hmm.
and entertaining people.
Right.
Because the minor leagues, they have audiences. There are a lot of people in these small towns. The minor leagues were a major
That's
component.
their that's their team.
That's their team. So,
Yeah.
you know, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody shouldn't necessarily have to go to the armed services in order to be able to afford college.
That's a super fact. So, um, on May 23rd, going back to what we were talking about, different ways to entertain people, we had the versus battle between Beanie Man and Bounty Killer. Man and Bounty Killer. This is the first time the versus battle has two artists in the same room in the midst of the COVID, and it just took the versus to another level. So now after this one, and she wants all the praise in the world that Jamaica did it better. Jamaica, it's like all right. But after that one, every battle that they've had since then, the two artists that going back and forth, they've been in the same room. So that is something that kicked it off, and it's been great ever since. Then on May 25th, we have for 8 minutes and 26 seconds, Officer in Minnesota. I'm not even going to say his name, but
Um,
he takes the life of George Floyd. I'll keep going because you seem like you're thinking so.
let's deal with May.
All right, so let me just finish though.
Mm.
This also leads to May 28th. There's a state of emergency after uh, the George Floyd situation. May 29th, the officer is finally charged with third-degree murder. The rest of the officers on they're actually charged on June 3rd, but they're all charged for second-degree murder. May 30th, there's a state of emergency in LA, Philly, Atlanta, where they start, to install curfews and
Mhm.
things of that nature. Um, yeah, I don't want to end on a bad note, but
No,
I guess.
no. Let's go through June because that'll be halfway through the year, and then we can at our
Okay,
next
all right, bad.
class we'll start in July. Okay, I'll say this. Just in terms of May, uh, May 19th. That's when Malcolm was born,
Mm-hmm.
and for years we would go out to where he was buried.
Yes, yes, yes.
You know, every year we go out there and salute him and his wife, Betty Shabazz. And one of the things it's important to remember that Malcolm comes out of a family of activists. His father, his mother, both of them were Garveyites.
Mm.
Uh, the family,
Yes, they mentioned that in the book. Yep. Yep.
the
Mm-hmm.
family that Malcolm's dad had before he met Malcolm's mother. His Malcolm's older sister Ella and her other siblings were very prominent in Malcolm's life as a teenager because eventually he moves to Boston with them, and they get him out of the foster home and juvenile delinquents and stuff that he was caught up in as a kid, and they get him to Boston, and they were very influential. One of the things they were influential in Malcolm's life. One of the things that I really did not like about Spike's movie about Malcolm was that it really didn't show him as a family man. And it's important to realize that he was a family man. George Floyd was a family man.
Mm-hmm.
The damage done was not just to him, but to his family and the community that he interacted with. He was looked at as a good person, man. You know. So when we look at the level of rage, we need to understand that again, these public lynchings. And when you see the look on that dude's face, man, that demon's face,
That's what
it
killed
was
me.
like he knew what he was doing,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And you know, recently with this Blake thing, you're setting up a pattern, and it wasn't set up then, but there's a pattern whereby the prosecutors decide, well, we don't have enough evidence to even charge this person. Yes, you do. But they don't want to take the chance that the jury will find them guilty. So this is something that again, I think the pandemic has influenced it because a lot of these white kids would have been involved in so many other different things, but now they got a chance to see what's really going on.
And I was gonna say I think that's what was the difference this time is that we were all home. I mean, still
Yeah.
home, but we were all home. That was fresh. We're still getting used to being, you know, the whole coronavirus and everything like that. But now we're all at home and we're all watching this in real time.
And what they're beginning to see is they're making connections with and the connections that they're making, they're thinking about their college debt.
Mm-hmm.
They're thinking about their interaction with police. It may not be the same as bad as ours, but that don't mean it's without contradiction.
Right.
Then you got a situation where their humanity is touched because they're
Right.
looking at the situation. They're saying, "Whoa, this is happening like this." Because they're seeing it's happening every other day. This one, next thing you know, they turn around, another one lynch, another one lynch, another one lynch. Now, you know, if they're busy in college, if they're busy, doing all these other things that socializing, now they're in confinement. They're in the lockdown like everybody else, and
Right.
they're looking on and they're scrolling through, YouTube and all that stuff, and they're coming into acting. They're coming into programs that are giving other perspectives of what's going on in the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh wow, and then they realize that they have to make a stand as well against this, or they lose their humanity.
I was about to say, what was your thought when people began to march and protest, and now you're out there with people that normally wouldn't be there?
I think that
Because that was the first time.
I
I
just
mean, I'm sure it's happened before, but that was my first time actually seeing
as many.
as many white folks out there. And they like they trying to out passion you too. It's like, all right, I got you.
But you got to remember, in Jackson State, that was a small black college, historically black college.
Mm.
Africans were killed, and they were speaking out not only against racial injustice but against the Vietnam War.
Mm.
Kent State, primarily a white historical college, they lost students there, and the students who were murdered were white kids.
Mm.
The rebellion in Chicago at the time of the protest, really in Chicago, against the contradictions in the Democratic Party and during their political primary in Chicago in '68. A lot of white kids were involved in that. SDS, the Weathermen, there were a lot of white kids who were involved, at a certain time, and they had to find different ways to separate, that reality. But again, television was new to a certain degree, and over a period of time they stopped showing as much of the brutality that was going on, and that made it easier for white folks to step back as if it didn't involve them because they didn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
So Vietnam, they learned from the footage of what was being shown in America that led to the outcry against the war. Because when people were seeing it every day, they said, you over there killing all them people over there, wait a minute, what's going on with this? And then as they learned the fact that, that those people had voted for Ho Chi Minh, North and South Vietnam, he was overwhelmingly the people's, representative. It wasn't like, he gangstered, no, he led the rebellion against the French. And then America decided they were going to be the next colonial power over there. Nope, ain't going to happen.
Mm.
Them people had fought against the French for more than 20 years. So when America came in, these were schooled warriors. They weren't going to back down.
Mm.
It might take a little bit longer because American guns and all of that stuff. And you still got areas in Vietnam to this day that cannot be farmed. Either Agent Orange has so badly damaged the terrain that they can't grow nothing on it, or the bombs that they drop. Certain areas, people are still running into these bombs every now and then, losing legs.
Mm.
Got a high rate of amputeeism, and a lot of it has to do with the mines that were planted that weren't found, or the bombs that were dropped that didn't explode quite rapidly. And then what ends up happening, some kids playing a game on some field or something and actually, accidentally, steps on a mine, bam, dead or losing a leg. This kind of stuff is going on. um, people saw that on TV, and that's one reason why the way they showed it in Iraq, the way they showed it in Libya, you don't get the real sense of what as Americans are being affected. You don't get the sense of the damage done to these people, you know, because now you got drones doing it, or just the video footage is just not, all consuming to the degree that it was. But America done lost more than a few people over there in Afghanistan and in Iraq,
Mm-hmm.
and so, and not to mention the damage that they've done to the people over there.
Right.
More than 1 million Vietnamese were murdered, in the attempt to colonialize them. So we look at now, these people had time on their hands and they saw what was going on and they said, we got to do something against this. Can't we, or we'll lose our humanity. And so, yeah, yeah, yep. Now they're out there.
Now we've had this conversation before, and you made a mention of it, and something that I still view in a different manner. Like when things like this happen, we one of the first kind of things that starts to happen is a riot, and people start to burn down these buildings, and they're destroying liquor stores and all that other stuff. So some of these places I could care less about Target and the liquor stores that's in the neighborhood, whatever. And not that I want this to happen, but a lot of times we end up destroying our own communities. One of the things I was actually, I hate to say it, I don't know what better way to say it, but I was actually um, happy to see. I don't know if happy is good is a good word, but it was good to see that when this situation happened with George Floyd, they were actually making their way to that cop's house. But now we see what happens when they got there. They were protecting this house. They had cops sitting around this place. But I've always wondered why sometimes when these things happen, we destroy our own communities and
Well,
don't go into the suburbs and destroy those communities. I don't even know if this is politically correct in what I'm saying, but
I mean, I
go
get
ahead.
what you're saying. I would say this on a certain level, it ain't our community.
That's a fact. That's a fact.
We just live here.
That's a fact.
So many of the stores are owned by people. When they shut down, they go somewhere else to go to sleep.
Hmm.
So, and not only that, some of these places, some of these, for a long time, it took a while just to get a job in these stores. You know,
True.
that was a battle. In fact, here in New York, Adam Clayton Powell, what got him on the map was that he led marches on 125th Street, and it was like, don't shop where you can't work.
Mm.
Don't shop where you can't work. If they ain't got nobody, if they ain't hiring nobody that look like us, don't give them all your money. You know. Then they put pressure on the banks to offer loans to Africans who were trying to set up small businesses but previously couldn't get loans. I mean, there was a whole thing. So eventually, a couple of banks, black owned banks, get established. Um, so I'll say that when it happened, a lot of times people's frustration was being voiced against the fact that these businesses in the area that we live were not owned by us.
Right.
Because if you see more often than not, the small businesses that black people own, they didn't get burned.
Right. That's true.
Mom and pop stores, no, they didn't get burned. But the other stores, everything else was fair game because it wasn't ours.
Right.
You know, so that was a part of the anger that we had not, you know, uh, we didn't have access to the investment funds that would have allowed us to own the buildings, the homes, the apartment buildings, in our community, or let alone the businesses.
Okay.
Mm.
June 1st, 45 takes a picture in front of the church, and he's threatened to deploy the U.S. troops. June 5th, Washington, D.C. paints Black Lives Matter on the street, and the NBA makes an announcement that they're going to restart on July 30th. June 12th, Atlanta starts a protest after the killing of Rayshard Brooks by an officer. In June 22nd, the MLB announced that they're going to restart on July 23rd. And on June 30th, this is the last one, Governor Tate signs a bill to replace the state official flag in Mississippi, and they are going to remove the Confederate flag signs. And that is the first half of 2020.
Yeah, around that time, I attended a meeting, online meeting. Primarily adults who were doing on a panel, who were educators, but there's one high school student, and it was the only voice who gave voice from the student's point of view.
Mm.
The rest of the folks were quote unquote educators. They were talking about making schools safe, and under the circumstances, what were some of the strategies that needed to take place so that the children were comfortable, whether it was online or as they come back into the schools, how to make it safe, that schools are a safe haven, and dealing with the stress that children were going through. Well, the student was angry because some of the demonstrations that we were talking about earlier, all of them weren't about burning stuff down and all like that. And by the way, I don't call them riots. I call what just happened in DC, that was a riot. Previously, in our communities, there were rebellions against down pressing. All right. Them people were not down pressed. They just
Right.
didn't get their way and they're upset about it.
Right.
So they're tearing shit up.
Right.
The student, they would, all these demonstrations were taking place. And the student said, I'm really upset that I just learned about Juneteenth with these demonstrations. Prior to that, I didn't have a clue what Juneteenth was about. Very upset. The student was very upset. None of the educators even addressed the terrorism of the curriculum
Mhm.
that is infecting all and affecting all of these schools.
Mhm.
The white nationalism that's propagated in these schools that declares that white people are the only ones who've done anything of worth. It was only done by white people.
I'm
When
a,
you when you study world history, what do they talk about? White folks. Mind you, white folks are less than 15% of the world's population.
mm,
Let me say that again. White folks are less than 15% of the world's population. So that means that 85% of the world, the planet's population, is being ignored or devalued based on lies
right.
and the deliberate historicide that takes place that declares that nobody else's history is worth studying except for these people who are now known as Europeans.
That was one of the things that was and this is going to be my suggestion later on when we close out. This documentary called Black Boys is what I just sent you, and they touched on the school system and how with our culture they don't teach it, they don't talk about it, and when they do, it's going to be Martin Luther King, it's going to be slavery, and it's like that's not it. And one example that they used was that two different schools talked about um, Martin Luther King's letter when he was in jail, and they had the one school who had a majority of black boys in their classroom. They're in there when they talk about this assignment. They're going to draw a picture of Martin Luther King in jail, and in this other school, they're having a debate about what his letter is about. And when you are in these schools, all you're going to see against the wall is who drew the best picture of Martin Luther King locked up.
Mm.
And that type of thought process and just seeing that, well, that's all I am. And Mello was in the documentary, and he was talking about the fact that like when he was in school, it was like he didn't really know. It's like those that information about our culture and our background has to be done by us.
Yes, and it ought be a situation where when world history is studied anywhere on the planet, that they include everybody on the planet.
Right, the world.
But as you said, each people have a duty to maintain connection with their own history. However, one of the drawbacks between the misunderstanding and therefore the contradictory application of integration as opposed to desegregation was such that schools that taught black history, in other words, black schools, even though they might not have all the material resources that the white schools had, the teachers were adamant that those children were going to be able to compete when they got to college.
Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of information, historical information, language training, preparation for dentistry or medicine or any of the sciences, they went down with a vision. They were like, y'all gonna get this, so you're gonna come out of high school, you're gonna be prepared to do battle intellectually. This young student that I was talking about previously was very upset because Juneteenth, that student didn't know about it. And was upset that had only learned about it in the Juneteenth. What's Juneteenth? Let alone the fact that Juneteenth represents the liberation of African people from these death camps by African people.
Right.
Because the story of the war between the states is not told as an African victory, but make no mistake about it, the reaction to that victory was prominently based on the fact about putting black people back in, quote unquote, our place.
Mm-hmm.
The post-Reconstruction era, the building of these statues glorifying the Confederacy takes place after the 1876 election, whereby it legitimizes the terrorism that took place throughout the South to get black people to suppress the participation of black people in the political development of what was going on in the South, whereby there were alliances made between these newly freed Africans from these death camps and poor white people. And so the deliberately attacking that, in such a way, and then pulling them apart, who had mutual interests, and together they were fighting against the entrenched oligarchy, the money class. Was like, oh, now it's set up so that poor white folk are identifying with being white as opposed to interacting with other poor folk.
Right.
And on a class level saying, no, we need to, because we got more in common than y'all do with the white folks that got money. Nah, because the money ain't trickling down.
Right. And shout out to those black soldiers who decided to actually start celebrating Memorial Weekend. They actually, black soldiers actually started that, and the I want to say the government was just throwing bodies to the side, and these black soldiers and a few white ones, but these black soldiers actually properly buried all this. They wanted to properly bury these soldiers, and then after that, and they actually threw a cookout, and a few white soldiers came through, but they actually threw a cookout. That was one of the first Memorial Weekend cookouts, and then after they probably buried all these soldiers, then they decided to acknowledge it. So I told my sis, I said I'll celebrate Memorial Weekend because that started off some black men started that. I don't care what they talk about now.
That's a good thing. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Black soldiers started that, and they wanted to recognize their fallen soldiers that they lost. They started that.
So yeah. So Juneteenth, I actually celebrate Juneteenth from June 13th through June 19th because it was staggered like that. It didn't happen just on June 18th or June 19th. It was staggered because what we're talking about is the implementation of emancipation for Africans. So you have some people who were celebrating actually January 1st because folks were waiting to hear whether or not the Emancipation Proclamation was going to pass because but even when it passed, it wasn't worth the paper it was printed on because it only addressed those death camps that were in Confederate areas that the Union had soldiers in, and those states like Maryland, which was fighting with the Union, but was a quote unquote slave state, they were not affected by the Emancipation Proclamation. If you read it carefully, it says it's addressed only to those states which were in at that moment in succession. And in fact, Lincoln himself had said that if freeing black people would help him maintain the Union, then he would free them. But if keeping black people chained up was going to keep the Union, then he'd keep them chained up. He was not the abolitionist that a lot of people think. And in fact, he gets credit for what we did because the Union was actually close to losing the war. You got to remember, the Battle of Gettysburg is being fought where? Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So that's in the north.
Yeah.
And then it ain't in Mississippi. No. So the Confederates were bringing the war to the Union. And they had to wait until a couple of battles were won by the Union. And in fact, there's a discrepancy depending on whose newspaper you read. The South declared victory. The North declared victory, but is probably closer to a draw, if anything. But what ends up happening after a couple of skirmishes like that, where they're in a position to say that they were winning, we just need some more folks, to get this overdone, get this done quickly. Then they passed the Emancipation Proclamation, and the Emancipation Proclamation was more about setting up a situation where the North could enlist Africans into the Union Army. That's what it allowed them to do. It didn't free nobody that was still under the jurisdiction of the Confederates. But what it did allow was between 160 and 200,000 Africans to become a part of the Union Army and Navy, and as such, turn the tide. And black folks, we turned the tide of that war. That's a victory that we did, and that's one of the reasons why the South and those white folks in the South were so vicious in the suppression of black people after 1876. And in fact, part of the compromise that took place was that the soldiers would be out of the South because the soldiers enforced the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which don't mean nothing if it's just a piece of paper. It took soldiers. So the soldiers said, oh, and only in certain areas, because in certain areas where the soldiers didn't have a heavy presence, the Ku Klux Klan and all of that is coming along, and they're like the terrorism. Hey, that picnic that they had yesterday at the Capitol building is just that compared to the amount of terrorism that was going on in the South by these Ku Klux Klan and other terrorist organizations that were being developed in the South by these white folks in order to downpress the development of black people. And then you eventually come up with a movie like The Birth of a Nation, where there were no black people in that movie at all. All the people that look like black people were white folks in blackface. So, but the impression is, they want to show black folks as these lazy, watermelon eating, chicken eating, white women loving, white women raping black folks who need to be saved by these guys in the hoods. And this struggle that we're going through now, make no mistake about it, it's political, it's spiritual, it's intellectual. And it's cultural in the sense that culture is how we do anything. How do we utilize architecture? How do we utilize astronomy? How do we utilize mathematics? How do we utilize any of the sciences? It's how do we utilize these sciences? It's not simply dance and music and poetry and storytelling, although that's an integral part of it. It's not simply that. It's how we fashion our clothes. How do we decorate our homes? All of these things. What kind of homes do we build? How do we interact with nature? All of that is culture. So there's a cultural war going on in terms of dealing with every aspect of our lives. And we need to understand that. And we need to understand that this is not only about a reclamation of African history and African people. And as such, it's imperative that we as African people no longer accept 1619 as a demarcation point in order to understand who we are. We have more than 1 million years of history on the other side of the water in that place now known as Africa. More than 1 million years. And if we stop and think about that mathematically, it doesn't make sense to limit our understanding ourselves to the last 400 years when we got more than 1 million years of history on the other side of the water. We weren't just sitting around twiddling our thumbs waiting for somebody to come snatch us and bring us over here and then have the audacity to talk about all the turmoil. Africa is underpopulated behind what the amount of millions of Africans, between 1 and 200 million Africans lost their lives in that travesty. And we're just talking about from 1500s through 1888. between 1 and 200 million, because for every African that made it over here, between 10 and 20 lost their lives. We fought. The technological weaponry, yeah, Europe had an advantage, but we fought. And that young student, I was so happy that that student brought up the issue about being angry that they didn't they weren't being taught our history, who we really are. They were upset about that. And ought to have been. The fact that none of the adults signed on to that or even mentioned, yes, the terrorism of the curriculum is a prominent factor in the miseducation of our children, affects and infects our children. And so many of us as adults affected, infected, and are psychologically and spiritually traumatized because we think that we come from people who never did nothing. When in fact, we provided the foundation for humanity all over the planet. No matter what science you're talking about, no matter what scientific field that you're talking about, no matter what type of culture you're talking about. In fact, the original indigenous people all around the planet, everywhere you go, the oldest people you find anywhere on the planet, anywhere and everywhere on this planet were black people. This thing that we know as color is a relatively new phenomena. Even if we just deal with Homo sapiens sapien, modern people, between 200,000 and 300,000 years, Homo sapiens sapien has been on this planet as such documented. As technology gets more improved to document these scenes and to properly notate when what happened. As technology improves, we get older. But this thing is the color range that we have on the planet today, less than 40,000 years. Some people will say even less than 20,000 years. So that means overwhelmingly the most majority of time human beings on the planet was only black people. And we went through several Renaissance periods in terms of technological and cultural development, in terms of how we interacted with each other and the technical capabilities that we developed. Where we were working with nature, not trying to conquer nature. And if you look at it, in places like if you look at Eskimos in certain regions, you notice that these dark people. Dark people. So that it belies that concept that dark people don't do well in cold climates. Not only do we do well, but think about this. In the cold, folks building houses, igloos out of ice. And they have a relationship with ice. People say, oh, they got a lot of these different names for snow and all that kind of stuff. But not only that, but can you imagine building a house out of ice? Living in that house and building a fire in a house made out of ice and it don't melt. That's living with nature, living with nature. And you look at them people, some of them is just dark as us, man. Mm-hmm. But they maintain their melanin because they're living out. They're not living in caves. They're living out on the land, and they're eating fish as well as other seasonal fruits and vegetables. So, and it's appropriate that we're stopping in June because between March and June, that was the first semester that we the school thing, and
Mhm.
eventually, as we talk, in the rest of go over the rest of the year in our next program, we'll get an idea, and even this one may be cut in half. Once you do what you need to do
Mhm.
when you edit. Um, you know, um, yeah. Now the children are going on vacation, but one of the things that has happened is that the development of the communiversity is getting stronger.
Mhm.
And that's one thing that we haven't talked about, but we will. And there's some prominent folks who inspired us to develop this particular podcast. I think it'd be nice for us to mention a couple of names of some folks who have podcasts that are really doing a good job when it comes to providing information for our community and inspiring us to participate in the development of the community, the rejuvenation of the communiversity,
Mhm.
where every place and space that we inhabit becomes a place for us to make a commitment to learn and to grow intellectually and in every other way.
Definitely. All right. So this was part one. And like you, just to echo those sentiments, we went through January to June, and yeah, hopefully we can come back next week and
Okay.
finish off the second half of this.
Okay.
And yeah, so I don't know. Do you want to give a suggestion, or you just want to wrap?
I think we should wrap up. The rest
Okay,
of the
so
year.
we can wrap,
Because
and
we
then
January. This
next
is the
week we'll do.
time to do it.
All right, so then next week we'll do our suggestion part. So we're not going to do that this time.
Mhm.
But yeah, uh, close us out for the first half of the year of 2020. Just a little thought, whatever.
I think more than anything else, it proves that we're survivors. And we have the capability of dealing with obstacles as we always have. And make no mistake about it. When we get on the other side of this particular issue, there are going to be other issues.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to understand that that's the way that life is. We're always going to be confronted with adversity. And how we deal with that adversity will determine our ability to move forward to the next adversity. It's an opportunity for us to learn. So this is an opportunity for us to learn and to relearn in certain cases things that we've done before. Vaccines are not new to us. We had different ways of dealing with vaccines, and we didn't have to worry about Frankensteinian mentalities that were using vaccines in order to experiment on people and end up killing more than they helped heal. That was not a part of African history. Vaccines, in fact, were developed by African people, whereby, and in fact, the smallpox vaccinations that were initiated started by African people. And that's something that we need to understand that happened here in this particular country. In fact, the brother who started it was an enslaved African, and then had to eventually struggle to get his freedom after he had helped so many of these white folks get through that. Oh man. Anyway, we as African people, we got a lot of work to do. And it's important that we get a deeper and more profound understanding of who we were, so that we can have a clear understanding of who we are, and thereby be in a position to plan for where we want to be.
Mm.
As they say, people without a history, it's like a tree without roots. It can bear no fruit. When we fail to plan, we're planning to fail. Only way we can plan for the future is to have a clear understanding of where we are. And the only way we can have a clear understanding of where we are is to practice Sankofa. In other words, we got to go back and fetch it. We got to look back to history because that's the only place where the information is. We can hope, plan for the future, but we can't live there. We can't learn from the future. There's nothing there yet. It will be provided by what we do today, and what we do today will be based upon what happened before. And if we continue to allow people to limit our understanding of the past to enslavement, damn near anything will seem like it's progress.
Um, take advantage of every day that you're here.
I say.
Take advantage, and just to echo, what you said. Like I said, I found myself, as I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, talking about all the things I had planned to do in the future. You know what I mean? And one thing, at least, just to close out for the first half of the year, I learned to be in the present, and to be in the present, and to you can only control what you have right in front of you. You know, and not to take any day for granted. You know, that mindset has changed for me. You know, January 26th. Like as crazy as it sounds, like I said, I wasn't the biggest Kobe fan, but just that like that rocked me, you know. And you think that you got all the time in the world, and you think that well, I'll do it. And one thing that I didn't mention here was that in starting in June was when I went back to school, and I'm just now getting more comfortable saying it, that I'm in school, and that's one thing. When this hit, fill this time, do something with your time, you know. Try to exercise your mind to start doing other things, because one of the things that I've also heard a lot since this COVID has hit is that they want you to just be sitting in the house, not doing nothing, and nah, you gotta keep the wheels turning by any means. And I definitely took some time to try to invest in myself. So make sure you invest in yourself. Uh, Anything that makes you happy, invest in it. Do it. Don't wait. Time waits for nobody. Tomorrow is not promised.
I say. Well, I want to add one thing.
I'm gonna let you have that last word,
I,
man.
I got to do this.
Go ahead.
School is wherever you are, as long as you're in a frame of mind to learn.
I'm trying to make sure that I instill it in this kid's head. I keep hitting them with it, because it's like now it's like more than ever. Don't sit here and wait for that Zoom meeting to say, "Oh, I'm in school now." No, man.
It's not a building, it's a state of mind. If you're in the frame of mind to learn, you're in school no matter where you are.
That's a super fact.
If you're not in the frame of mind to learn, it don't matter where you at. You ain't in school. So school is a frame of mind. As long as you're in the frame of mind to learn, you're in school.
That's a fact.
And we salute our ancestors for reminding of us that every day.
Definitely.
And I regularly look at this poster I got that originally I gave to a very dear friend and family member, Mostel.
Mm.
She gave it back to me before she made a transition. Two words that stand out: don't quit.
Mm.
Don't quit. Don't quit. Yeah. So we leave y'all with that. Don't
Don't
quit.
quit. Don't quit. All right. See you next week for part 2 of this episode. And yes, cool.
Ejeku. Chama John.
I gotta get back to, we gotta get back to, I gotta get back to black. We gotta get back to, I gotta get back to, we gotta get back to black, 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 black.